The waves shimmered beneath the fading sun as the cruise ship sliced through the Pacific toward Hawaii, the decks glowing golden under the last light of day. Angela Barrett leaned against the railing, her eyes fixed on the horizon where sea met sky in an endless hush. Her hair danced in the breeze, but her mind was tangled in something heavier. It was supposed to be a honeymoon, a celebration of new beginnings, but something about Colin's mood the past 2 days had begun to worry her. Colin Masters, her husband of exactly 3 days, had always been an enigma, wrapped in a soft voice and a camera lens. He was thoughtful, adventurous, and just distant enough to intrigue her when they met. But on this ship out in the middle of nowhere, his silence had grown thicker, his gaze more guarded. Angela had asked him about it gently that morning at breakfast. He said he was just tired, needed some quiet. She believed him. At least she tried to. Later that night, she returned to their stateroom after a spa treatment only to find it empty. Colin's shoes were gone. His wallet remained on the table. His phone sat charging on the nightstand. The camera, however, was missing. At first, she thought he might be out on the deck taking photos of the moonlight on the waves. But as hours passed and midnight came and went, her worry hardened into fear. She checked the ship's dining areas, the bars, the pool, the library. He was nowhere. Security was alerted. The ship's crew initiated protocol. But by morning, all they could confirm was that Colin had last been seen around 10 p.m. near the upper deck. The footage showed him walking alone. Then nothing. No other angle, no exit, just the blackness of the ocean beyond the railing. By 9 a.m., the captain announced that authorities would be contacted and the ship would continue toward its scheduled destination. Angela stood in front of the security room as the grainy footage played again. She watched Colin's figure cross the deck slowly, his shoulders slightly hunched, the camera strap visible against his chest. He stopped briefly and seemed to lean on the railing. Then the feed cut to another camera. There was no jump, no splash, no sound. The deck was empty again. The implication was clear, even though no one said it outright. He must have fallen overboard. Angela couldn't accept it. Colin had spent months telling her about his plans for a photo book after their honeymoon. He was too cautious, too precise. He didn't drink, he didn't gamble, he wasn't reckless. He would not have slipped. But the ship's staff was polite and firm. No signs of foul play, no witnesses, no lifeboats missing, no body recovered. Just a new wife with questions and a chilling silence where answers should have been. When the ship docked in Honolulu, Angela was escorted off separately. The press was waiting. She refused to speak. They had already dubbed it the honeymoon tragedy, a mysterious disappearance, a grieving widow. The questions followed her through the hotel lobby, through her flight back to San Diego, and into her apartment where everything reminded her of the man she married and lost in the same week. She tried to reach Colin's family. No one responded. His sister Mara was last known to be living somewhere in Oregon. His mother had passed years ago. His father had never been in the picture. It was as if he had never fully belonged to this world. Weeks passed, then months. A detective from the cruise line's insurance division called her with a follow-up. He asked if she was aware that Colin had recently updated his life insurance policy. She was not. Apparently, 3 weeks before the wedding, he had taken out a new policy for $1.5 million. She was the sole beneficiary. Angela sat in stunned silence as the man on the phone asked her to verify some personal details. She gave the answers robotically. After the call ended, she stared at the framed photo of her and Colin at Joshua Tree, leaning against one another beneath the wide desert sky. What did she not know about the man she married? Her law firm put her on indefinite leave, citing media attention. Her bank accounts were frozen temporarily during the investigation into the insurance claim. She refused the payout. She told them she didn't want the money until she knew what had happened. They told her the case was inactive. No evidence of foul play, no indication of fraud. Colin was presumed dead. Eventually, bills mounted. The media lost interest. Her friends offered sympathy, then distance. Her phone stopped ringing. The apartment felt too large, too full of memory. Angela packed her things and moved into her father's house near La Jolla. Captain William Barrett, retired Navy, lived a strict and quiet life. He asked no questions. She was grateful for that. One evening, a year after the disappearance, Angela sat alone on the patio sipping tea when a memory surfaced. Colin had once mentioned Anchorage. He had shown her a photo of a snowy mountain trail and said he'd taken it during a road trip long ago. It wasn't a significant detail at the time, just a story. But now it felt different. She pulled out a shoebox of Colin's old postcards and camera gear. In the bottom was a business card from a camera repair shop in Anchorage. She turned it over. There was a handwritten note on the back. Ask for Ellery. The name meant nothing, but the location did. Angela opened her laptop and began searching. The shop still existed. It had changed ownership, but was still open. A flicker of something stirred in her chest, not hope exactly, but maybe a direction, maybe a step toward the truth. She'd been standing still for too long. She emailed the shop. She asked about the name Ellery. No reply came for 2 weeks. Then a message arrived. We may have something that belongs to your husband. A lens with a custom serial number. Purchased in 2007. Found in a storage unit we acquired last year, paid in cash, signed to J. Ellery. Angela's heart raced. It wasn't proof. But it was more than she had seen in years. Someone out there was using her husband's past. Or maybe it was him. Alive, hiding, watching. Whatever the truth was, she knew one thing. She was going to Alaska. Angela travels to Alaska, following a lead about Colin's lens, only to encounter resistance and suspicion. The deeper she looks, the more inconsistencies surface in the original case. The cruise line remains tight-lipped, and Colin's actions before the wedding reveal possible secrets. The wind cut across the Anchorage harbor with a cruel sharpness that bit through Angela's coat as she stepped out of the cab. The city was framed in gray clouds and icy sidewalks, its rhythm much slower than California's sun-soaked pace. The address from the email led her to a small camera shop nestled between a fishing supply store and a diner with fogged-up windows. A bell above the door chimed as she entered, drawing the gaze of a middle-aged man behind the counter. He looked up from the register and tilted his head curiously. Angela introduced herself and mentioned the lens. The man hesitated, then nodded slowly and disappeared into the back. He returned with a padded case and placed it gently on the counter. She unzipped it and felt a strange chill. The initials CM were etched into the side exactly as Colin had customized all his gear. The clerk explained they had purchased a bulk lot from an abandoned storage unit and found the lens inside along with a few notebooks and maps. Angela asked if the contents were still available. The clerk said they had been handed over to local authorities because one journal referenced maritime routes and missing people. That word stuck. Missing. He offered her the contact of the local officer who had taken interest in it. She thanked him and stepped back outside into the biting cold, her thoughts swirling faster than the wind. Lieutenant Rachel Monroe of the Anchorage Police Department was calm but cautious when Angela met her the next morning. The office was small and cluttered, a reflection of a place overworked and underfunded. Rachel offered coffee, which Angela declined, then opened a file and laid out what they had found. There were several maps marked with red pen tracing routes along the Pacific coast. The journal entries were minimal, filled with half-sketches and vague statements. One entry stood out. It read, "Some people vanish to be found. Others vanish to stay gone." Angela felt her pulse quicken. Rachel said the name on the rental paperwork for the storage unit was James Ellery, the same alias from the business card Angela had discovered. No local ID matched. No fingerprint records returned a match either. Angela asked if Colin's prints had been compared. Rachel said they had not been sent, nor had there been any formal request from California law enforcement. Angela realized then that the case had gone completely cold, perhaps deliberately. She asked if she could take photos of the journal pages. Rachel allowed it. Angela snapped each page carefully, knowing any detail could matter later. Before leaving, she asked Rachel one final question. Had anyone ever come in asking about the unit before it was auctioned? Rachel paused, then nodded. A man had called twice under the name Thomas Crane. No ID, no follow-up. Just inquiries about the location and contents. Back in her hotel room that night, Angela spread the photos across the bed. The markings on the maps showed points near small coastal towns and unlisted docks. She looked up each location. Most were associated with ferry terminals or fishing routes rarely trafficked by outsiders. She traced one particular line that began in San Diego and stopped abruptly near a fishing village in British Columbia. The handwriting beside it read, "Final stop, unless she finds me first." It was unmistakably Colin's. Angela pulled up records from the cruise line trying to access passenger lists and security logs from the voyage, but everything required legal access or clearance. She made a few calls to old contacts at the firm, but the responses were cold. One former colleague told her the cruise line had sealed the documents under a joint privacy agreement with the insurance company. Angela hung up and stared at the ceiling. Someone was ensuring this case stayed buried. That meant someone powerful. She remembered Colin's quiet tension before the cruise. He had known something. Maybe even feared something. Angela turned to her laptop and typed out a formal request to the Department of Transportation for vessel travel logs. If she could not go through the front door, she would start knocking on side windows. She ended the email and shut the lid. 2 days later, she received an anonymous envelope at the front desk. Inside was a printed manifest from the cruise dated the day Colin vanished. It listed every employee and registered guest. Angela scanned the list and froze when she saw the name Thomas Crane listed under security staff. She remembered Rachel's words. The same name had asked about the storage unit. Colin must have known someone was watching him. Angela went back to the photos of the journal and focused on a sketch near the end. It was a rough drawing of a man in uniform with a note that read, "He knows. Check behind the camera room." That detail had never been in the cruise report. Angela called the original cruise line security division and asked about a man named Crane. She was put on hold for 10 minutes before the call dropped. She tried again. This time the number was disconnected. Frustration bubbled up inside her. The pattern was clear. There were too many obstacles, too many strange silences. Angela made a final stop before leaving Anchorage. She returned to the shop and asked the clerk if any other items had turned up from the same storage auction. The man hesitated and then disappeared into the back room again. He returned with a cardboard box filled with miscellaneous items. Angela sorted through it carefully. At the bottom, wrapped in cloth, she found a broken watch. It was Colin's. A gift she had given him on their wedding day with the engraving, "Until the tides return." Her hand trembled as she turned it over. The band was snapped. The glass cracked, but it was his, no doubt. She asked the clerk when it had been found. He said it was loose inside the back wall of the unit, hidden behind insulation. Someone had not wanted it found. Angela thanked him and returned to the hotel in a daze. That night, as she lay awake, she remembered Colin's words on their last evening together. He had looked at her sadness in his eyes and said sometimes the sea washes away more than it returns. She had thought it poetic at the time. Now it sounded like a farewell. Angela returns to San Diego only to find her professional reputation damaged and her personal life in disarray. She uncovers disturbing financial transactions made by Colin before the wedding, and realizes someone may have been watching her long before the honeymoon began. Angela stepped off the plane into a damp San Diego evening, the scent of ocean salt carried on the air like an old memory. The streets were familiar, but something inside her had shifted. She no longer walked like someone looking for peace. Now she moved like someone chasing a shadow. Her father picked her up from the airport in his battered truck, silent as ever. He drove without asking questions. She was grateful for that. Back at his house, Angela dropped her bag beside the couch she had turned into a bed months ago and opened her laptop without even taking off her coat. Her inbox was overflowing. Some messages were spam, some condolences long expired. One subject line caught her eye. It was from her bank. The email stated that an account under her name had been accessed in Vancouver 2 weeks earlier. She had never been to Vancouver. She clicked the attached security alert and stared at the IP address, her heart beginning to race. Someone had used her identity in Canada and had failed the password recovery test. That someone was searching for her or for something connected to her. The next morning, Angela visited the downtown branch of her bank. She sat with a financial advisor who wore a thin smile and a blue suit that didn't quite fit. He tapped at his keyboard while she handed him the printed email. After several minutes, he explained that a wire transfer from one of Colin's older accounts had been redirected 3 months before their wedding. The recipient was a shell company based out of Belize. Angela asked if Colin had any overseas accounts. The man hesitated, then nodded. The system flagged an inactive offshore holding in both of their names funded 2 weeks before the wedding, with a balance of $1.5 million. That was the same amount as the life insurance policy. Angela stared at the screen. The advisor said the account had never been touched. She asked who opened it. He said Colin had filed the paperwork in person using both of their signatures. Angela felt her stomach turn. Her name was there, her signature too, but she had never signed anything. Someone had forged it. Angela returned home and pulled out her old files from before the wedding. She combed through tax returns, bank statements, even Colin's photography invoices. Everything looked clean until she reached a document folder labeled Legal. Inside were printed forms related to the life insurance policy. The policy had been adjusted 31 days before the wedding. The original version had listed Colin's sister as beneficiary. The new version named Angela. The signature page was the same she had seen on the offshore account. It was not hers. She compared it to her actual signature on their marriage license. The differences were subtle, but they were there. The loops, the slants, the spacing. She took photos and stored them in a hidden folder on her computer. She had always trusted Colin. Now, she did not even trust her memories of him. Later that night, Angela heard a strange sound outside her father's house. It was not loud, just a low scraping against the gravel driveway. She peeked through the blinds and saw a dark sedan idling across the street. The driver smoked a cigarette and stared straight ahead. She watched for 5 minutes before the car slowly rolled down the hill and disappeared. The next morning, she mentioned it to her father. He looked concerned but said nothing. She decided to buy a small camera and mount it in the window. If anyone came back, she would know. By the end of the week, Angela received a thick envelope in the mail, and there was no return address. Inside were old photographs. Some were of Colin, some were of her. She recognized one image immediately. It had been taken through a cafe window 6 months before their wedding. She was alone, reading a newspaper, unaware of the lens. Another photo showed her walking out of her office in downtown San Diego. Another showed her at the beach with her friend Mia. Angela's hands trembled as she flipped through the rest. These were surveillance photos. Someone had been watching her long before the cruise, long before the wedding. One final photo made her freeze. It showed Colin standing in a parking garage facing a man in uniform. The man was tall, muscular, and wore a badge that said Crane Security. The back of the photo was stamped with a date. It was taken 4 days before they boarded the cruise. Angela drove to the law library that afternoon and began searching records on private security contractors. She found a listing for a now-defunct firm called Crane Maritime Solutions. The business license had been revoked a year earlier, and the address led to a storage warehouse near the harbor. She wrote down the details and closed the file. Something was becoming clear. Colin had ties to people who operated outside the system. Offshore accounts, forged documents, surveillance photos, fake security companies. This was more than a disappearance. This was an operation. She returned home to find her father waiting with 2 cups of tea. He handed her one and spoke for the first time in days. He told her that years ago, when he was still active duty, he had heard whispers of cruise lines being used for private transport, not just cargo or people, but secrets. Angela asked what kind of secrets. He said he never wanted to know. But he warned her, "Once you start pulling a thread like this, you better be ready for what unravels." Angela stared at the tea until it cooled. That night, her camera captured movement at 2:13 a.m. The sedan was back. This time, it stopped longer. The figure stepped out, walked halfway up the driveway, then returned to the car. Nothing was taken. Nothing was left. But now she had a face. The man was bald, heavyset, and wore a jacket with a strange emblem on the sleeve. Angela paused the footage and zoomed in. The patch showed a crescent moon over an anchor. She searched the symbol online and found a match. It belonged to a retired Naval Intelligence Division disbanded in 2003. Angela begins tracing the emblem found on the surveillance footage. Her search leads her to a forgotten property near the harbor and uncovers an abandoned locker that contains a critical piece of Colin's past. She also learns of a woman linked to both the fake security firm and the Belize shell company. Angela sat motionless in front of her laptop as the screen glowed with the emblem she had enhanced from the security footage. The crescent moon over an anchor was not connected to any current organizations, but an archived military reference site listed it under a decommissioned naval intelligence unit known as Division 82. The site claimed the group had been involved in joint operations between maritime security and intelligence gathering during the late 1990s. Most records had been scrubbed, and those that remained pointed to classified activity. Angela dug deeper and found a discussion thread on a message board for retired naval personnel. One user mentioned a warehouse in the San Diego shipyard that had once stored decommissioned equipment for Division 82. The address matched the revoked business license of Crane Maritime Solutions. Angela took a deep breath and copied the location. Her father's words echoed in her mind, but the curiosity inside her had grown too loud to ignore. She drove to the harbor late that afternoon. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows between the rusted shipping containers and silent warehouses. The building at the address looked abandoned, its windows boarded, and a no trespassing sign bolted crookedly to the gate. Angela parked a block away and walked the rest of the distance on foot. She carried nothing but her phone and a flashlight. The perimeter fence had a hole in the wire partially covered by weeds. She slipped through and made her way to the side entrance. The door was padlocked, but the wood frame had rotted enough that she could wedge it open. Inside, the air smelled of oil and salt. Dust coated every surface. Machinery parts and filing cabinets stood untouched in the gloom. She moved slowly, scanning the room for anything out of place. At the far end, she found a locker room with rows of metal doors. Most were empty or broken. One was sealed with a combination lock that had been painted over. She tapped it with her flashlight and saw the faded name etched into the steel. Ellery. Angela's hands trembled as she searched the locker's edges. The hinge had rusted through at the bottom. She pulled gently, and the panel gave way with a groan. Inside was a duffel bag and a black plastic binder. The binder held laminated IDs, all for Colin, under different names. One was issued by the cruise line with a security badge. Another bore the name James Ellery and matched the forged storage rental in Anchorage. The bag held an old Nikon camera, a stack of undeveloped film rolls, and a bundle of letters tied with twine. She slid the letters into her coat and zipped the bag shut. Before she left, she took photos of everything. On her way out, she noticed a faded corkboard by the door with several thumbtacks still embedded. One scrap of paper had not been removed. It was a receipt for a shipping container rental dated 2 days before her wedding. The location listed was a private dock in Ensenada, Mexico. Back home, Angela spread the contents of the duffel across her bed. She opened the letters carefully. They were addressed to someone named Cara Vance. The handwriting was Colin's. Each letter described travel movement and plans to secure safe passage. One letter included a blueprint of a ship's layout and marked corridors that avoided cameras. Colin mentioned Cara by name and warned her to avoid the forward deck after midnight. The letter ended with a line that made Angela's blood run cold. "If anything happens to me, do not contact Angela. It is safer she never knows. Angela sat back overwhelmed. She had never heard of Kara. She had searched the name online and found a tax record from 2006. Kara Vance had been listed as a logistics officer for Crane Maritime Solutions. Further digging revealed her connection to a Belize-based company named Meridian Trades. Colin's shell account had been wired to them. Angela needed to find Kara. She visited the city clerk's office and searched property records. One entry listed a Kara Vance as the prior tenant of a P.O. box in La Jolla. The forwarding address was inactive, but the associated phone number had once belonged to a local travel agency. She went there the next morning, only to find the building had been converted into a bakery. Angela asked the staff if they had any old records or remembered the agency. A man in the back, possibly the owner, overheard and said his aunt had purchased the space from a woman named Kara around 2011. He remembered her well. She had left suddenly, sold the business for cash, and never returned. Angela thanked him and asked if he had any paperwork from the sale. He disappeared into the office and returned with a box of files. She flipped through until she found it. The buyer's name had been listed as Tom Crane. Angela stared at the document. The link was undeniable. That night, she loaded one of the undeveloped film rolls into Colin's Nikon and developed it in her father's garage, using old supplies from his Navy days. The images appeared slowly. The first few were landscape shots, but one photo stood out. It showed Kara Vance and Colin standing on a balcony overlooking the ocean. Both were smiling. Both were wearing cruise line uniforms. The timestamp read 4 days before their wedding cruise. Angela knew what she was seeing. Colin and Kara had been working together. The question now was why, and where had Kara gone? Angela begins following Kara's digital footprint and finds a remote town in British Columbia linked to the Belize account. In her search, she uncovers a gas station security tape showing a man resembling Colin alive and moving supplies 2 years after his disappearance. Angela spent the next 3 days in near isolation, her focus locked onto her laptop as she traced every known transaction connected to Meridian Trades. Most paths led to dead ends, corporate black holes designed to obscure ownership. One obscure banking trail, however, stood out. A payment from Meridian had been wired to a general store in British Columbia, located in a fishing town called Commer Bay. It was a tiny community built along the edge of a forested inlet, accessible only by ferry or seaplane. The transfer had occurred in 2009, nearly 2 years after Colin had vanished. Angela's heart pounded as she enlarged the receipt. The goods listed included non-perishable food fuel canisters and camera film. She wrote down the address and began searching ferry schedules. The only route to Commer Bay ran twice a week from a mainland dock 6 hours north of Vancouver. Angela booked a ticket and made arrangements to fly to Canada the next morning. The ferry to Commer Bay rocked gently across the quiet inlet, its motor humming steadily as mist clung to the tree-lined shore. Angela stood near the railing, hands stuffed into her jacket pockets, watching the fog drift like low smoke across the water. The air smelled of pine and salt. Only 6 passengers had boarded, most locals who paid her no attention. When the boat pulled into a small wooden dock, Angela stepped onto the creaking planks and followed the road toward the main strip of town. There were no streetlights, just cabins, a small clinic, and a general store with a sagging roof and faded signage. She entered the store, her footsteps echoing on the warped floorboards. A man behind the counter looked up. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a trimmed beard and wary eyes. Angela introduced herself and asked if he had ever received a wire transfer from a business called Meridian Trades. He hesitated, then nodded slowly and said they used to get international supply requests once or twice a year. When she asked who picked them up, he said a man named James. Angela asked if the store had security cameras. The man gestured to an old system mounted in the corner, then explained the tapes were overwritten every 30 days. Angela's heart sank, but she asked if he had any backups. The man said he had saved footage from a night in 2009 when someone broke into the store and stole tools. He still had the tape in a box under the register. She offered to help him look. Together, they found the box dusty and rusted from age. The man handed her a VHS tape and said he remembered the night well because he recognized the thief. It had not been a stranger. It had been James. Angela thanked him and asked if he remembered anything else. The man shrugged and said James had always paid in cash, wore a ball cap pulled low, and came in only after dark. The last time anyone saw him was around 2011. Angela found a bed and breakfast on the edge of the village. That night, she borrowed the owner's tape player and fed in the footage. The screen flickered static-filled, but the scene gradually sharpened. A figure entered the frame just after midnight. He wore a heavy coat and cap, his face partially obscured, but his walk was unmistakable. Angela leaned forward, her breath catching. It was Colin. He moved with quiet precision, opened a crate, and lifted out a box of batteries. The camera caught a glimpse of his profile as he turned toward the door. The timestamp blinked. August 2009. 2 years after he had supposedly disappeared. Angela rewound and paused the frame. She snapped a picture on her phone and stared at it. Her husband was alive in this moment. Somewhere out there he had chosen to vanish and left her behind. The next day, Angela hiked the trail behind the town that locals said led to old hunting cabins near the tree line. She found 3, all abandoned. One still had remnants of recent activity: a burned-out stove, faded newspapers, and a bedroll. In a corner, hidden beneath a floorboard, she found a tin box filled with undeveloped film rolls and a handwritten list of coordinates. The handwriting was Colin's. She recognized the narrow slant and sharp corners of his letters. She pocketed the film and the list. The final coordinate pointed to a remote island just off the coast of Vancouver Island. Angela knew then that Colin had created an escape path, a trail of breadcrumbs only she might ever have the reason to follow. That evening, Angela returned to the store and showed the old man the photo of Colin from the tape. The man studied it and said yes, that was James. He had lived in the far cabin beyond the bridge, but it burned down years ago. Angela asked how it burned. The man said lightning struck a tree during a summer storm. By the time help arrived, the fire had already consumed the structure. No body had been found. No one knew if James had been inside. Angela thanked him and walked to the edge of the village, her thoughts heavy. If Colin had survived that fire, he might have moved again. If not, then everything left behind might be the last trace of him. Back at the bed and breakfast, Angela developed the film rolls in the owner's darkroom. Among the images were landscapes of dense forest and cliff shots of stormy skies and one final photo of a woman standing at a shoreline, her back turned. She wore a gray jacket and had dark hair pulled into a braid. Angela did not recognize her at first, but then she found a matching image in the bundle of letters from the locker in San Diego. It was Kara. She had been with Colin in Calmer Bay, maybe even after that. Angela checked the photo's edge for a timestamp. It was faded but visible. December 2010, nearly 4 years after the honeymoon. Someone had followed the same path Angela now walked. But where had they gone next? Angela returns to the U.S. and confronts Mara Colin's estranged sister. Mara reluctantly shares a letter she received from Fiji months after the disappearance. The envelope contains a photo of a boy with Colin's eyes and a coded message pointing to a hidden camera archive in Oregon. Angela stood at the gate of a small homestead outside Eugene, Oregon, staring at the porch where wind chimes clinked softly in the breeze. The yard was overgrown but peaceful. It had been nearly a decade since she last saw Mara Masters, Colin's only sibling. Their relationship had never been close, and after Colin vanished, Mara had cut all ties. Angela hesitated before knocking. When the door creaked open, Mara appeared older and leaner, her once fiery hair dulled to auburn gray. She stared at Angela without speaking. After a long pause, she stepped aside and motioned her in. The house smelled of cedar and old books. Angela explained what she had found in Alaska and British Columbia. At first, Mara said little, only listening as she sipped tea and kept her gaze on the rain-specked window. Then she disappeared into another room and returned holding a weathered envelope with foreign postage. She said it arrived 6 months after Colin disappeared, and she had never opened it until years later. The return address was Fiji. Angela carefully unfolded the contents of the envelope. Inside was a photo of Colin standing on a pier beside a young boy with dark curls and serious eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. Behind them stood Kara, her hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. The back of the photo had a series of numbers handwritten in Colin's neat block letters. At first, Angela thought they were dates, but Mara said she believed they were map coordinates. She never acted on it. She could not bear to. Angela wrote them down and then examined the letter folded beneath the photo. It was brief and strange. It did not address Mara directly. Instead, it contained a paragraph about silence being safety, then mentioned a key that had been buried in a camera archive they used as kids. Angela asked Mara if she remembered such a place. Mara nodded slowly and said Colin used to keep his old gear in a storage locker near their childhood home in Salem. It was where he learned photography. The place had been abandoned years ago, but the building still stood. Angela drove to Salem the next morning. The locker facility was fenced off, but she found a maintenance worker who let her in after she explained she was family. The units were quiet row after row of rusting doors under a tin roof. She found number 16, the one Mara had mentioned. The door screeched open. Inside was dust and darkness. She found broken tripods, boxes of photo paper, and a wooden trunk with a padlock already snapped off. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, was a metal box and a memory card sealed in plastic. Angela pocketed both and returned to her hotel to examine the contents. The box contained old negatives, mostly landscapes, but one was labeled K1. When she developed it using the room's portable scanner, the image showed Kara holding a newspaper dated July 2011. In her hand was a USB drive. Angela recognized the shoreline from the background. It was not British Columbia. It was Fiji. Angela then loaded the memory card onto her laptop. It contained a single folder labeled Archive. Inside were dozens of encrypted video files. Only one played without a password. The video was grainy but intact. It showed Colin alone in a dimly lit room, speaking directly into the camera. He said his name and gave a date. August 4th, 2012. He explained he had staged his disappearance with the help of Kara to escape a covert surveillance project gone rogue. He mentioned the name Crane and a list of other unknown operatives who were planning to use cruise passengers as test subjects for biometric tracking. Angela paused the video. Her chest felt tight. This was more than a personal betrayal. It was part of something dangerous. She played the rest of the message. Colin said he had not intended to involve Angela, but things changed when someone tried to frame her using forged documents. He said the insurance policy was bait away to monitor interest from external parties. He admitted he lied to her that he was working undercover before they met, but he claimed his love had been real. In the end, he said he feared the people following him would harm her if he returned. He left the drive with Kara, hoping to one day resurface when the threat passed. Angela sat in silence as the screen faded to black. She called Mara and told her what she had seen. Mara was quiet for a long moment, then asked what Angela planned to do next. Angela said she would go to Fiji. She needed to know the truth. She needed to see the boy. Mara agreed to help however she could. Before they hung up, Mara said something Angela would remember later. If he is alive, and he did all of this to protect you, then he must still be watching. Maybe he is waiting for you to follow the map he left behind. Angela travels to Fiji, following the final clues left behind by Colin. In a remote village, she meets a fisherman who confirms Colin once lived there under the name Jace. After a storm destroyed his hut in 2015, Colin vanished again, but a personal item left behind reveals the identity of the boy in the photograph. Angela arrived in Fiji beneath a heavy sky, the tropical air thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth and distant ocean spray. She stepped off the small commuter plane with only one backpack and a folded map in her hand. The coordinates from Colin's letter pointed to an isolated village near the southern coast of Vanuatu, far from resorts and tourists. She hired a driver who took her along winding roads, past sugarcane fields and banana trees until they reached the edge of a dirt path. From there, Angela walked alone. The rain came and went in bursts, warm and relentless. As she climbed the last hill, she saw the village come into view, its wooden homes built on stilts and its people moving with unhurried grace. She approached the first house with visible nerves. An older woman greeted her with cautious eyes. Angela showed her Colin's photo and asked if she knew the man. The woman called over a younger man who introduced himself as Taika, a fisherman who had lived there most of his life. He looked at the photo and nodded slowly. Yes, he said the man had lived in their village years ago. He had gone by the name Jace. Taika invited Angela to sit beneath the awning of his house as the sky released another wave of rain. He told her that Jace had arrived in the village with a woman and a child sometime in 2011. They had come by boat weathered and silent and kept mostly to themselves. Jace taught photography to local kids and fixed fishing nets in exchange for food. The woman spoke little Fijian, but smiled often. The boy, quiet and watchful, played by the shoreline. Taika said they lived in a small hut near the cliff's edge. He saw them often during the early years. But in 2015, a storm swept through the coast. Lightning struck their home in the night. When villagers arrived to help, they found the hut in ruins. The woman and child were gone. Jace was never seen again. Angela asked if he had died. Taika shook his head. He said no body was found, just scorched beams and a trunk half buried beneath sand and ash. Angela followed Taika to the remnants of the old hut, now overtaken by vines and fallen branches. The ocean rumbled below the cliff, its spray reaching the rocks with steady force. Taika pointed to the hollow where the trunk had once been. He said they buried it in the sand nearby. Angela dug with her hands, her fingers slicing through wet earth. After half an hour, she struck wood. The trunk was intact, though its hinges groaned with rust. Inside were ruined books, a moldy camera, and a metal tin. She opened the tin with trembling fingers and found a child's drawing folded tightly. It showed 3 figures holding hands beneath a sun, the tallest one labeled Papa. The handwriting was messy, written in thick black crayon. She turned the paper over and found a name printed in smaller, more careful letters. Jonah. Beneath it was an address in Suva, the capital. Angela stared at the letters. Colin had a son. He had left him something, maybe everything. That evening, Angela returned to the village and asked to borrow a phone. She called the number listed on the drawing. After 2 attempts, someone picked up. A male voice answered. Angela introduced herself and asked for Jonah. The line went silent for a long moment, then the voice returned quieter this time. He asked who she was. Angela said she was a friend of his father. The boy paused and then gave her an address. They could meet tomorrow in Suva at the public library. Angela thanked him and promised to come. That night, she barely slept, the weight of possibility pressing into her chest like a stone. The next day, she took a bus into Suva. The ride was long, the windows fogging with heat, but her mind stayed clear. She replayed the video of Colin from the memory card again and again. His voice haunted her. His face held both apology and urgency. She arrived at the library just before noon. The building was old and filled with the hum of fans and the rustle of paper. At a corner table sat a teenager with dark curls and a guarded expression. He stood as she approached. Angela greeted him gently and introduced herself again. Jonah nodded, but did not smile. He asked if she really knew his father. Angela said yes, and for the first time in years she believed that answer completely. Jonah spoke carefully, his voice deeper than she expected. He said his father had told him stories about someone named Angela, a woman he once loved but had to leave behind. He said Colin never called her by name, only referred to her as the truth he could not keep. Angela felt her throat tighten. She asked what had happened after the fire. Jonah said Colin had taken them to a safe house in another village, but the illness began soon after. He grew weaker with each passing month. By the time Jonah turned 10, Colin could barely stand. He died in 2021. Kara had returned to the United States. Jonah chose to stay. He said he wanted to finish what his father started. Angela asked what that was. Jonah reached into his backpack and pulled out a hard drive. He said it contained everything Colin recorded about the operation, about Crane, and about the real reason they were targeted. He said Colin made him memorize every name, every face. The hard drive was Colin's final message to the world. Angela returns to California with the hard drive Jonah gave her. While trying to decode its contents, she visits a local pawn shop and discovers Colin's engraved watch in the display window. Surveillance footage from the store reveals a teenager pawning at Jonah. Someone has followed him from Fiji, and Angela realizes they may already be watching her too. Angela stepped off the plane and back into the familiar chill of the San Diego night. The sky above the airport was clear, but her thoughts churned with uncertainty. In her carry-on bag sat the hard drive Jonah had entrusted to her. It weighed no more than a paperback book, but it carried the final legacy of a man who had vanished to protect her and his son. She took a taxi to her father's house where the lights were off and the porch light flickered dimly. He greeted her at the door with a quiet nod and did not ask any questions. She went straight to her room and placed the drive on the desk. Her laptop was already open. She connected the hard drive and waited. The screen flickered once, then displayed a password prompt. She typed in every date and name she could think of, but nothing worked. A single clue remained on the sticker attached to the device. It read, Project Horizon. The next morning, Angela walked through downtown to clear her head. She passed a familiar storefront and paused. The dusty glass window of a pawn shop reflected the morning sun, and something inside caught her eye. It was a wristwatch, silver, with a scratched face and a worn leather strap. She recognized it immediately. It was the watch she had given Colin on their wedding day. The back was engraved with a phrase only the two of them had known. She entered the shop with her heart pounding. The clerk looked up from the counter and gave a casual nod. Angela asked about the watch. He shrugged and said it had come in a few days earlier. She asked who sold it. He pointed to a logbook and said she could look, but no names were used. Just video surveillance. Angela asked to see the footage. In the back room, the clerk played the tape. The quality was grainy, but clear enough. A teenager stood at the counter holding the watch. His face was familiar. Her breath caught when she realized it was Jonah. He wore a hoodie and looked nervous. He said little and left quickly. Angela froze the frame and took a photo of the screen. She turned to the clerk and asked if anyone else had asked about the watch. He hesitated, then nodded. A man in a suit had visited the day before and asked if the watch was still in stock. Angela asked for the footage again. The man appeared tall, clean-shaven, and wore dark glasses. He never gave a name. Angela recognized the emblem on the edge of his briefcase. It was the same crescent and anchor from the surveillance footage back in San Diego. The same symbol linked to the old Division 82. Angela left the shop and walked 3 blocks before stopping to breathe. Jonah had been in California. He had not told her. Someone had followed him from Fiji, that someone might now be watching her. She returned home and checked the security camera still mounted on her window. The previous night's feed showed nothing unusual. She checked the footage from 3 days ago. At 2:15 in the morning, a sedan parked briefly across the street. A man stepped out, looked toward the house, then drove away. Angela enhanced the still and confirmed it was the same man from the pawnshop footage. That night, Angela locked every door and window. She sat with the hard drive on her lap and stared at the password prompt. She whispered the phrase again and again. Project Horizon. Then she remembered Colin's notebook from Alaska. One page had a series of coordinates followed by a word scribbled in red. Horizon Sunset. She typed it in. The drive unlocked. Folders filled the screen. They were labeled with dates, names, maps, and logs. The most recent file was a video. Angela clicked it. Colin appeared once more, this time seated beside a younger Jonah. Colin's voice was softer. He spoke of choices of sacrifices, of how his love had kept him from bringing Angela into danger. He warned her to trust no one, not even those who claimed to be helping. He said Crane had never stopped searching. He said Project Horizon was never shut down. Angela watched the next file. It contained audio logs from inside the cruise ship, surveillance recordings of passengers who had been unknowingly tracked with biometric devices embedded in jewelry and gifts. Colin's voice narrated how the data had been sold to private defense contractors. The final log mentioned a meeting that had taken place 2 days before the wedding. Colin had confronted Crane. The result was a threat: disappear or see Angela indicted. He chose to vanish. Angela leaned back in her chair. The truth was more terrifying than she imagined. She forwarded the files to a private encrypted cloud and shut the laptop. In the following days, Angela searched for Jonah but found no trace. His name did not appear on school records or travel logs. She visited local shelters and youth centers, asking quietly but received only shrugs. Then, one afternoon, a letter appeared in her mailbox with no return address. Inside was a drawing on the same thick crayon paper she remembered. 3 figures beneath the sun. This time, she was in the center. The word family was written beneath it in large letters. She clutched the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. Angela follows a new clue embedded in one of the drive's files that leads her to a hidden studio Colin once used. There, she discovers a vault filled with undeveloped film and blueprints connected to Project Horizon. Meanwhile, she receives a message from Jonah revealing he is in danger and plans to turn himself in to draw out Crane's team. Angela sat at her desk and reopened the hard drive, this time focusing on a folder labeled Aperture Log. It contained GPS coordinates and timestamps, none of which matched the places she had visited before. One entry stood out. It referenced a warehouse studio in Santa Rosa and carried a recent timestamp logged only weeks before Colin's final recording. She printed the address and packed a bag. Santa Rosa was a 6-hour drive up the coast, but distance no longer meant much. Everything now led forward. Her father offered to come with her, but she declined. The fewer people involved, the better. She reached the town by early evening and found the address tucked between a vineyard and an abandoned cannery. The building was weathered brick with tall windows partially covered by ivy. She knocked once, then let herself in using the code Colin had used in other files. The lock clicked open. Inside, the air smelled of dust and wood. The space had once been an art studio. Skylights filtered in amber light across canvases and filing cabinets. Angela moved carefully past stacked boxes until she reached a sliding door near the back. Behind it was a dark room. The chemical scent was faint but familiar. She flipped on the red light and saw rows of undeveloped film hanging neatly in sealed tubes. On the table sat a series of notebooks. She opened the first one and found Colin's sketches, maps, and surveillance reports. The name Horizon appeared again and again, circled and underlined. One diagram showed a cruise ship schematic with ventilation paths marked and camera blind spots mapped out. Another page listed aliases and identities, all connected to Crane's operations. Some were familiar. Some matched names on recent news headlines. Angela realized this was not just a personal archive. It was evidence. It documented over a decade of covert activity. She turned to a final binder labeled For Jonah. Inside were letters Colin had written but never sent. Each one addressed a different lesson: how to trust, how to hide, how to forgive. Angela read them slowly, her heart breaking with every page. Colin had prepared for the worst. He had tried to build a future for a son born in the shadow of secrecy. One letter included a diagram of a hidden safe inside the studio wall. Angela followed the drawing and found a panel behind an old photograph. Inside the safe was a memory card labeled Archive Final and a folded note. The note was short. If you have found this, then you know the truth. Protect Jonah. Finish what I could not. Angela took the memory card and returned to the dark room. She loaded several film rolls into the developer. The images emerged slowly, revealing faces, dates, and locations. One showed a conference room filled with men in military dress standing around a digital display. Another captured Crane speaking to a group at a private airstrip. Colin had been closer to exposing the network than anyone realized. She saved the developed images and copied the memory card's contents to a new secure folder on her drive. Then her phone vibrated. A message had arrived from an unknown number. The text was simple. "I am sorry. I left something at the bridge." She knew it was from Jonah. She checked the timestamp and location tag. It was just outside San Pedro beneath a small pedestrian bridge near the waterfront. She raced out of the studio and drove through the night. Every turn of the wheel felt heavier. At sunrise, she reached the bridge, parked and searched beneath the support beams. There, she found a duffel bag hidden beneath a pile of rocks. Inside were more film rolls, a battered notebook, and a cell phone. She powered it on and found a single unsent message addressed to her. It read, "I am going to meet them. They think I have the original data. They want me to trade it. I will not give them anything. I just want them to stop chasing us. I will try to draw them out. If anything happens, tell people who he was. Tell them he mattered." Angela's hands shook as she pocketed the phone. She returned to her car and drove to a secure location she had once used during her legal days. It was a small apartment above a bookstore owned by an old friend. She called the friend and explained little, only that she needed space and silence. Inside, she loaded Jonah's film into the developing kit. The photos were chaotic but revealing. They showed Crane's team watching Angela's house, following Jonah in Fiji, and even entering a data recovery center. In one image, a man handed a briefcase to another wearing the same crescent and anchor patch. Another showed Crane boarding a private jet with two men Angela had seen in Colin's archives. Then the door buzzed. A package had arrived with no return label. She opened it cautiously. Inside was Jonah's backpack. Blood was smeared along the zipper. Her knees gave way. She sat on the floor and cried, gripping the straps with trembling hands. At the bottom of the bag was another drawing. This one showed only two figures beneath the sun. The child was gone. Angela knew it was not a goodbye. It was a signal. He had gone dark, just as Colin once had. He was buying time. Angela tracks Jonah's last known location and coordinates with an investigative journalist Colin once trusted. The final confrontation with Crane's network exposes the full scope of Project Horizon, but not without sacrifice. Angela is left to carry Colin's legacy and Jonah's hope into the world. Angela stared at the blood-stained backpack on the floor as the midday sun stretched across the faded hardwood. Her fingers gripped the straps as if she could hold back time itself by refusing to let go. The air inside the bookstore apartment felt thinner than before, as if the walls knew what had happened and recoiled in silence. She opened her laptop and reviewed Jonah's last message again. Every word felt heavier now. She searched for leads, but found no further texts. Then she remembered a name she had seen in Colin's notes buried inside the Santa Rosa studio. It appeared 3 times next to encrypted messages. It was not a government official or a member of Crane's team. It was a journalist. The name was Celia Renner. Angela opened her secure browser and searched the name. Celia had published only 2 articles in the past 5 years. Both were redacted versions of whistleblower testimonies. She worked independently now and operated from a safe house in Nevada. Angela found an encrypted contact form and submitted a request. She entered one phrase, "Only Colin sent me." Less than an hour later, an email came back with a phone number and a time. Midnight. That was the only word in the message. Angela waited for the hour, then dialed the number. Celia answered on the first ring. Her voice was calm but firm. Angela identified herself and mentioned Colin. Celia said she had met him twice during the early stages of Project Horizon. He had tried to feed her data but pulled back when the risk to Angela grew too high. Celia said she had continued to monitor satellite records and independent surveillance feeds. 2 days ago, a private aircraft matching Crane's old registration number landed in Nevada under a shell company. The same shell company Colin had documented in his Belize files. Celia said a car matching the description from the pawnshop footage had traveled from San Diego and was parked outside a decommissioned mining facility near the border. Angela asked if anyone had entered. Celia said yes. 3 men and 1 teenager. Angela felt her heart stop. Celia said if she moved now, they might still have time. By sunrise, Angela and Celia met at a ranger station with a plan. Celia had brought 2 camera drones and a backup transmitter. Angela had Colin's original archive. Together, they approached the mining facility, which sat half buried in red rock and sage. The building was surrounded by dust trails and broken fencing. From a bluff above the main structure, Celia launched the drone. Through the screen, they saw movement. 3 men stood near a vehicle. One man carried a briefcase. Another held a weapon. Jonah sat on the ground, hands behind his back, his face bruised. Angela leaned closer to the screen. She recognized Crane. He had aged, but not softened. He pointed at Jonah and said something to the others. Celia patched the drone's microphone through the transmitter. Crane's voice crackled through. He told Jonah the data was a dead end. Colin was a coward. Angela was a pawn. But Jonah could end it all. Give up the access codes and walk away. Jonah did not speak. Angela turned to Celia and said they needed to move. Celia activated the second drone and sent it toward the rear of the building. Angela climbed down the bluff, slowly using the rocks for cover. She crept along the edge of the mining shaft until she reached a side door. She tried the handle. It opened. Inside the facility, the light dimmed and the air turned dry. She moved quietly past rusted equipment and followed the sound of voices. Through a narrow window, she saw them clearly. Crane paced while the others stood near Jonah. Angela held her breath and stepped into the room. The sound of her footsteps made them all turn. Crane's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. He said nothing. Angela spoke calmly. She held out the hard drive and said, "This is what you want, but you will never understand it. Because it was not built for power. It was built for truth." Jonah looked up as if seeing her for the first time. Crane laughed and said she had wasted her time. He already had everything. Angela said no, he had nothing, because he had no one left who believed in him. Crane raised his hand and the man beside him moved forward. But before he could act, Celia's voice boomed from the drone speaker above. She said the building was now under satellite surveillance. Every feed was live. Every recording was being uploaded. She advised them to leave quietly or risk exposure. The men hesitated. Crane's jaw clenched. He looked at Angela one final time and said, "You have no idea what you just started." They fled, left their vehicles, took only what they could carry. Jonah stood shakily and walked toward Angela. She embraced him tightly and whispered that it was over. He said it was never really about the data. It was about the story. The world had to know who his father really was. Not just the man who vanished, but the one who stayed hidden to protect them all. 2 days later, Celia published the story. The recordings, the maps, the names. Project Horizon was exposed. The news spread across major networks and independent media. Crane's associates vanished. Some were arrested, others denied involvement. The hard drive was verified and submitted to an international tribunal. Angela stayed behind the scenes. She declined interviews. She spent her days archiving Colin's photographs and helping Jonah apply for university. He wanted to study ethics in technology. He said he owed it to his father. On the first anniversary of Colin's death, Angela and Jonah returned to the cliff in Fiji. They scattered Colin's ashes over the water as the sun dipped into the sea. Jonah said his father would have loved this view. Angela agreed. She handed Jonah a small wooden box. Inside was the watch she had found at the pawn shop. He turned it over slowly and read the inscription. Jonah smiled and said he would keep it close, not for time, but for memory. Angela stood beside him as the waves whispered below. The journey had ended not in triumph, but in clarity. Colin had died trying to build a future beyond fear. Jonah had survived because love had hidden him. The world had changed because truth had surfaced. Angela had lost the man she loved, but she had found something else, a son, a mission, a voice. If this story moved you, remember to like and subscribe for more gripping narratives inspired by real emotion and hidden truths. Share your thoughts in the comments. What did you feel, and where in the world are you watching from? We read every message.